Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. It looks like it's going to be a hot one. It's already 71 degrees Fahrenheit at 8 a.m. So I imagine by noon it'll be in the 80s or even into the 90s. There are lawnmowers everywhere, so taking this walk is going to be an interesting challenge to avoid too much small machine noise, but we'll do our best. Well, I thought today I would do a kind of Board Game Espresso episode, but I'm calling this Digital Espresso, Venti Edition. I feel terrible using that word, but I've put it out there already, and I'm not going to go back now. That's editing, and that's not what this podcast is about. So I've mentioned a number of times, often when I'm talking about new games I've played, that when I play a game online, it's online only, like in Board Game Arena or one of the other asynchronous online platforms. The experience of playing it is fundamentally different, and it takes me a lot longer to get the hang of it. Now, some games I'm able to grok more fully from the beginning. I'm able to grasp what it is they're doing and how they work, but most of the time it takes me several tries, in part because even if I watch a how to play video or read the rules, they often don't click the same way, in part because then I'm still taking turns once or twice a day, and it takes me a while to get to the point where, the different aspects of the rules really kick in. So I find that my ability to really perceive the way that the game systems work develops much more slowly, which is often why when I have a game that I've played only online, my record is very poor at the beginning, because I don't know what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll also just discover that I missed some crucial rule or crucial aspect of scoring that I really should have understood, but because I was learning it online, I kind of like, I'll just jump in and see what happens, and then only later did I realize, I should have really understood this thing. For example, in Earth, I played Earth 2 or 3 times online, and even though I had read about it, I didn't really understand how the animal cards worked, the scoring goals, until I played it on the table once, and then I kind of got the point of them. So this is all just to say, when I play digital games fully digitally, it takes me longer to understand them, which is why I usually don't talk about them in my first play game episodes. Thus, every now and again, I'll get to the point where I'm like, I have a bunch of new games I've played that I've never talked about on the podcast. And coincidentally, I also don't have 3 new games that I've played on the table to talk about right now. I have 2, but I need 3. So, in that regard, here we go. Our Digital Espresso episode. Now, I have 8 games to talk about. I don't know if I'll talk about them all in this episode. We'll see how it's going. I may end up just talking about 4 of them, in which case then I'll have another episode later to talk about the other 4. On the other hand, maybe I'll just talk about all 8. Okay. The first one I want to talk about is Spots. This is a 2023 game. I have seen this played on the table. I had a friend who brought a copy to our game night, Toggle Gaming, and they played it there, but I did not play it there. And since then played online several times, which gave me the sense of how the game worked, but I did not get a strong sense of it, or I was missing some key elements, I think. Nonetheless. So Spots is a game. It is a dice rolling push your luck game in which you are trying to roll dice to then put on these dogs, and the dogs all have spots on them that match the pips on the dice. It's a pretty simple, easy to understand how the physical properties of the game work. You roll a die, you put it on a dog that matches. But the clever bit is that you have these cards that you activate. There are 6 of them. And the card gives you a specific requirement about how many dice you're going to place or what you're going to do with them. And any dice that you can't place according to that rule go into the, I don't know what you call it, discard bin. And if you ever get over 7 pips worth of dice in the discard bin, then you lose all your dice that are on dogs. And you only get to, and you claim the dice, you claim the dogs if you fill up the dog, and then on your next turn you get to claim it. So there's a push your luck element in that you sometimes you don't want to waste a turn claiming dogs if you feel like you have room to get more stuff, right? The ideal situation is to try really hard to claim more than 1 dog at a time. I would say I was really bad at this game. I don't know if it was the asynchronous nature of it or just that I'm bad at predicting things and I like to push my luck too far. But the penalty in pushing your luck of losing maybe 1 completed dog or 1.5 dogs is really pretty brutal. I played it a couple times. I think if someone offered to play it again, I would. I'd be interested in trying it on the table. Maybe it would feel different. So I put it in the category of, maybe, but generally not my favorite. That was Spots. Next up is Break the Code. This is another one that was suggested to me by my friend Joe. I don't think Joe listens, but if he does, hi Joe. He also suggested Spots. I really liked Break the Code. This was a logic deduction game. The clues in it remind me an awful lot of Turing Machine, which is also a logic deduction game. In Break the Code, there are 10 code tiles, 0 through 9 in white, and then 0 through 9 in black, but the 5s are each green. So there's 2 green 5s and then 4 or 9 of each of the other numbers in white and 9 in black. And what you're trying to do is figure out which 5 tiles your opponent is using, and they're trying to figure out which 5 you're using, and the person who guesses it first wins, although you do get to take the same number of turns. So if your opponent guesses it and you went second, you have a chance to guess it and then tie. The clever part, or the part that's interesting, is on your turn you can either guess the pattern or you can ask a question of them, but you can't just ask any question. There are 5 questions laid out on the table, and you pick one of those questions to ask. And of course, different questions give different kinds of options. Like, it'll be like, how many numbers below 3 do you have? Or 3 or below? Or, I don't know. There's any number you can think, any question you can think of about that sort of thing works. Like I said, I like this quite a bit. The logic and deduction part was interesting. I wasn't all that good at it the first couple of plays. I felt like I was getting the hang of it as we went along. We didn't play tons of times of it. We played 2 or 3 times, and that was enough. I mean, if other people suggest playing it, I'll play it again. I probably won't go out of my way to play it much, although every now and again I might be like, let's do a couple rounds of Break the Code. So that's Break the Code. Next up, we have the new Uwe Rosenberg game, Applejack. Applejack is a simple tile layer, probably more in line with Patchwork or Nova Luna, that kind of game, rather than the games that have other mechanisms at play, like Mancalas, as in New York Zoo, or Worker Placement in Agricola. It's one of Uwe Rosenberg's simpler games. The way the game works, on your turn, you can pick from a number of hexagonal shapes to put into your apple orchard. And those hexagonal tiles there are like 5 or 6 different kinds of apples. And they'll have a combination of apples, beehives, and flowers on them. And when you place the tile on your board, you pay an amount of points equal to the number on the beehives on the card. So it might have a beehive that says 3, so you're going to pay 3 points. Now, because all the cards have beehives on them and they're on one of the 6 sides of the hexagon, or sometimes 2 or 3, there's one tile that has a beehive on all 7. Then what you want to do is match that beehive up with another beehive. And then as soon as you match that, you pay the amount written in the number on your beehive, so 3 in our example. And then when you match the beehive up with another beehive, you get back the number of points of the smaller beehive that you lined up. So let's say you have a beehive of 6 and your new tile has a beehive of 3. If you match it with the beehive of 6, you pay 3 and then you get 3 back. The crafty part, the tricky part is sometimes you'll be able to put it next to a couple different tiles, and if both of them have beehives and the tile you're putting down has multiple beehives, if you can line them up, you still only pay 3, but then you get the lower value on the beehives from both of the matchups that you did. That's pretty rare for me. I find that I'm not very good at that, and maybe that's why I don't know if I've won the game yet. But the other thing you're trying to do is make contiguous lines of the same kind of tree. So when you put down a hexagon, it's got one of those 6 types of apple tree. When you put it next to another hexagon with some of those same 6 types of apple tree on it, now you've got an area of those apple trees. And as the game goes along, different apple trees score in this kind of clearly visible order. And if your group of apple trees is bigger than the round number, then you score whatever the excess is. So like if it's round 3, you have to have a group of 4 trees of that color to score any points. That was more detailed than I meant it to be, but it is that kind of game. It's very puzzly. Reminds me of Nova Luna a little bit in terms of you're putting down a tile and you're thinking about several different aspects of how things go at the same time. It's relatively simple, but at the same time, there's a lot of depth in the interaction between the pieces. Applejack is pretty fun. It's not probably a game I would want to play on the table. It's a little too mathy. I mean, I would play it if someone else brought it. It's probably not a game I'm going to buy. Sometimes you just feel hemmed in by the choices that you're given from the tiles that are available, and I'm not good at it enough at it yet to be like looking ahead 2 or 3 tiles and thinking about which tiles are my opponent's going to take and which tiles are going to be available for me, particularly because it's not a solid market. You're actually moving this die around the market, and so the tiles that are available to you are not the tiles that were available, or not all the same tiles that were available to your opponent in the last round. I mean, it makes for an interesting game, and I enjoy it, so I'll happily play a few more times on Board Game Arena, I think, but I don't think I'm going to buy it. That's Applejack from Uwe Rosenberg. It might be related to Johnny Appleseed in terms of, I think, like the character drawn on the board is a kind of crusty itinerant apple farmer, but it's hard to tell. Next up is Watergate. Watergate is a very well-renowned 2-player card-driven game based around the Nixon scandal. Theme-wise, I'm not super keen on playing the Nixon scandal. I don't like being Nixon. Being the reporters trying to expose Nixon is kind of fun, but then losing feels real bad too. Nonetheless, it is an interesting theme, and like a lot of card-driven games, it does draw a lot of history out. Like, I'm more likely to recognize in the abstract the name of one of the Nixon conspirators than I would have otherwise. So that works pretty well. When I say card-driven play, it's much like 1960, The Making of a President, or Twilight Struggle, which I haven't played, or The Expanse, the board game, in which you have cards that give special powers, and then the cards have some sort of value as well. And you can either use the card for the value they offer to move a number of sort of control tokens around, or you can use them for the special power they have, which usually swings the game in your favor or your opponent's favor. In Watergate, you just have your own deck of cards. So it's not like in Twilight Struggle or The Expanse where sometimes you'd get cards that belong to your opponent. The push and pull is pretty interesting. The reporters win by connecting 2 different people to evidence and or getting 5 of the red momentum tokens, I think they're called. Nixon wins by getting 5 of the red momentum tokens, or that might be the only way. I guess if you prevent your opponent from getting, I think that's how you win. I don't remember if there's another way or not. I think it's just about momentum tokens and blocking your opponent from getting those sources. I'm enjoying it. I've played 3 games now, I think, and I'm either in the midst of a 3rd or the midst of a 4th. It's an interesting push-pull game. You know, generally, I'm not a huge fan of 2-player push and pull games. I prefer games where we're speeding side by side toward a finish and trying to get the most points versus I'll do stuff to take your stuff away. But I guess I like innovation, which is very much about that. So maybe I'm just getting used to it. All in all, this game is growing on me. I'm liking it more each time I play it. So I will keep playing it. I'm pretty sure it's a game I'm never going to play on the table because it's definitely not a game my wife would enjoy. And so I'm not going to buy it probably. Maybe at game night sometime. That's Watergate. Well, that was 4 games. I'm gonna charge on because the next 2 I'm going to kind of do together. Yeah. So the next 2 I want to talk about are On Tour and Lumen: The Lost World. I will recall back to after Gen Con last year. One of the games that I had tried there was I think it's called Gen 12 or Trek 12. And this is a game where you have a sheet and you're rolling dice and you're putting numbers into the sheet. And the idea is that you're making chains of numbers on the sheet. That core idea is also used in Lumen: The Lost World, except that you also have these transformation things. So you roll 2 dice and then you can either multiply them, add them, subtract them, use the higher one, use the lower one. And the idea is that each time you use one of these operations, you check it off, you have a limited number of uses of each one. The game ends, I think, when you've filled up the different options, but there might be some other end condition as well. And the idea is that you're either putting chains of numbers in ordinal order, or you are doing groups of the same number. And one of those options adds your units, your military area control units, to the shared board. The other of those, so if the ordinal number adds units to the shared board, then the groups of the same number let you move those units about and activate them. And so it's an area control game that's driven by your skill and or luck with this number chaining game. Now, you'll recall I say that Trek 12 wasn't really for me. I thought it was fine, but it didn't really work for me. I like Lumen, the Dark World, a bit better, but ultimately I think it's probably not for me as well. I'm certainly not going to go buy it. Wes has been suggesting we play it on Board Game Arena, and I've tried it a few times and had a good time, although Wes is clearly cleaning my clock, which is maybe why I'd hate to think that I don't like it just because I'm bad at it, but sometimes you have a game you're bad at and you feel like you can see yourself getting better. And other times you have a game you're bad at and you're just like, well, this just doesn't fit with the way I think about things or the way I strategize. And then you're bad at it because you're bad at it. And often those games are less fun. I think maybe Lumen lands in that category for me. I'm just not that good at it. Which is also how I felt about On Tour. I've played a couple games of On Tour on Board Game Arena. And that one also has, for me, this feeling of just not really fitting the kind of thing I like to do. Which is interesting because I do generally like push your luck games, and there's an element of push your luck. I do generally like kind of tactical strategy and my roll and rights, and that stuff is there as well. Yeah, for some reason that game didn't really click for me either. So that was On Tour and Lumen, the Lost World. Now the next game I want to talk about is a game that definitely falls into the category of a game I started out not doing well at all, and I've played it twice now, and I did a little better the second time, but definitely a game I'm enjoying. And I could see in the long term enjoying, and that's Caverna, the Cave Farmers. I got to try Caverna on Board Game Arena. And of course, you all know I'm a big Uwe Rosenberg fan. I like Agricola and have played dozens or hundreds of games of Agricola. I like A Feast for Odin. I also have a number of other Uwe Rosenberg games in my collection. So Caverna is a game I've always thought I would want to try. I like the difference of the adventuring mechanism where you have a dwarf and you go adventure. I can see how that becomes a kind of progenitor for A Feast for Odin's adventuring mechanism. I like the gentler food handling in Caverna, where it's easier to find ways to get enough food for your folks. I like the surfeit of options that opens up as the game goes along. It feels a bit more like A Feast for Odin that way, rather than Caverna, where sometimes somebody's in your way, but often you are able to do what you want to do. All of those things are pretty neat. I'm still trying to get the hang of like how to shift from building an engine that'll give me food and workers into how do I generate points. The last game I played felt like I was doing pretty well, and then we got to the end and I got literally half the points of the other people at the table, which, you know, isn't all that unusual in Agricola, but in Agricola you can tell it's coming because you did badly organizing your food or whatever. But I am enjoying what Caverna has to offer and looking forward to continuing to try it as we go along. So I think that's kind of where I am with Caverna, and looking forward to playing it more. Finally, the last game I want to talk about on this Digital Espresso Day is Memoir 44. Now this one might be the longest arc between first game played and discussion on the podcast, because over the years I've tried Memoir 44 a number of times. And I may even have talked about it before. I don't recall, but I'm talking about it again as though I haven't. Memoir 44 is, of course, a relatively rules-light board game about World War II, and generally it involves small-scale skirmishes with several squads of soldiers or of infantry and or some tanks and artillery. And the way the game works is the board is divided into three pieces, or three columns, and you get a number of cards that allow you to command different units on the board. Sometimes it'll be like command a certain number of units of this type. Then other times it'll be like command a certain number of units in this column. And so a lot of what you're trying to do is manage when you're going to move your troops and where, and looking ahead to the cards you have and seeing how you can manipulate them. It's taking me a little while to get the hang of it, but I've played several times in a row now, and it's really starting to come together in terms of a game I kind of understand how to play. The theme isn't my 100% favorite, but the gameplay is good enough that I am interested in playing more if my opponents suggest it. I don't know that I'll go out of the way to suggest a rematch, but we'll see. Well, if you want to try playing some games on Board Game Arena with me, or yukata.de, or I guess I don't really play on Bois de Jeu much anymore because it's going to close down any day, you can head over to one of those places and direct message me or add me as a friend and ask me to play a game. Wombat929 is my username there. If you want to send me messages related to other things, you can email me, brendan@rattleboxgames.com. You could send me a message on Board Game Geek, where Wombat929 is my username. If you haven't joined our guild there and posted in our guild, you really should do that, because that's super fun. Our guild is Guild 3269, and you can post in the guild there. I hope to see you do that. Thanks for joining me on a walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.